Samuel Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he hammered the last nail into the fence post. The Montana sun was getting lower in the sky, painting the mountains orange and purple. He stepped back to look at his work. The fence looked good, straight and strong, just like everything else he built on his ranch. 3 years ago, when Sam first came to this valley, there was nothing here but grass, rocks, and wild animals. Now he had a small house, a barn, corrals for his cattle, and miles of good fencing. Every board, every nail, every stone had been placed by his own hands. It was honest work, hard work, the kind of work that made a man sleep well at night. Sam walked toward his house, his boots crunching on the dry grass. His hands were rough and calloused now from all the building and fixing. These same hands used to be smooth and quick, lightning quick, quick enough to outdraw any man who dared to face him. But that was before. That was when people called him Deadeye Sam and crossed the street when they saw him coming. He stopped at his porch and looked out over his land. 40 head of cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The creek ran clear and cold through the middle of his property. Mountains stood like giant guards all around his valley. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was everything he had dreamed of during those long, bloody years when he lived by the gun. Inside his house, Sam lit the oil lamp and started making his simple dinner. Beans, bacon, and bread, same as always. He ate alone at his small wooden table, listening to the sounds of evening. Coyotes howled somewhere up in the hills. An owl called from the big pine tree near his barn. Normal sounds, safe sounds. After dinner, Sam sat in his only comfortable chair and tried to read a book he had bought in town. But his eyes kept drifting to the corner of the room where a large wooden chest sat locked and silent. Inside that chest were his guns, 2 Colt .45 revolvers with pearl handles, the finest shooting irons money could buy, and carved into those handles were 23 small notches, 23 men who had drawn against him and lost. Sam rubbed his hands together. Even after 3 years of ranch work, sometimes they still shook when he thought about those guns. Not from fear, but from memory. Muscle memory that never really went away. His fingers still knew exactly how those grips felt. His arms still remembered the weight of the weapons. His eyes still automatically measured distances and angles whenever strangers rode up to his place. But no strangers came to his valley very often. That was why he had chosen this spot. Miles from the nearest town, miles from the nearest neighbor, miles from anyone who might recognize the face on those old wanted posters. Deadeye Sam Morrison, wanted for murder in Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado territory. $5,000 reward. Armed and extremely dangerous. The posters were old, now, faded and torn. But Sam knew they were still hanging in sheriff's offices across the West. Lawmen had long memories when it came to men like him. Men who had killed for money. Men who had lived by violence. But Sam was different now. He had to be different. The killing had to stop somewhere. It had to stop with him in this valley, with this new life he was building. Every fence post he set was like driving a stake into his old life. Every cow he tended was proof that his hands could create instead of destroy. Every peaceful sunset was a victory over the darkness that had once ruled his heart. Still, the loneliness was getting harder to bear. Talking to cattle and horses wasn't enough anymore. He needed human company. He needed someone to share his meals with. Someone to talk to in the evenings. Someone to help him forget the sound of gunfire and dying men. That was why he had finally written the letter. Sam got up and walked to his desk. He pulled out a piece of paper from the drawer. It was a letter from the matrimonial news agency in San Francisco. He had read it so many times he knew it by heart, but he read it again anyway. Dear Mr. Morrison, thank you for your inquiry about our mail-order bride service. We have many fine young ladies seeking honest husbands in the Western Territories. Please find enclosed the photographs and letters from several suitable candidates. If you find one to your liking, please send your response along with the required fee. We guarantee satisfaction and safe delivery of your chosen bride to the nearest railway station. Sam looked at the photographs spread out on his desk. 5 young women, all looking serious and hopeful in their Sunday best dresses. He had studied each face for hours, trying to imagine which one might be happy in his remote valley, which one might not ask too many questions about his past, which one might help him build the peaceful life he dreamed of. One photograph kept drawing his attention. A young woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back simply. Her name was Margaret O'Sullivan. According to her letter, she was 24 years old, from Boston, and skilled in cooking, sewing, and basic medical care. She wrote that she wanted to start fresh in a new place, away from the troubles of her old life. Sam understood about wanting to escape troubles. He understood about needing a fresh start. Maybe that was why her letter spoke to him more than the others. She didn't write about wanting romance or adventure. She wrote about wanting peace, security, and honest work. Those were things Sam could offer. He had finally made his choice 2 weeks ago and sent his response along with the required money. Margaret O'Sullivan would arrive on next week's stagecoach. In his return letter, Sam had told her about his ranch, his cattle, and his hopes for building a family. He had been honest about the hard work and isolation. He had been honest about wanting a true partnership, not just a housekeeper. But he had not been honest about everything. He had not told her about the guns in the chest. He had not told her about the wanted posters. He had not told her about the 23 men who would never see another sunrise because of his skill with a pistol. He had told himself it was better that way. The past was dead and buried. His new life would be built on truth and honest work, not on the reputation of a killer. Sam folded the letter carefully and put it back in the drawer. In 6 days, Margaret O'Sullivan would step off the stagecoach in Cedar Falls, the nearest town to his ranch. She would be expecting to meet a simple rancher looking for a wife. She would be expecting safety and peace in this remote valley, and Sam would do everything in his power to give her exactly that. He would be the man she was expecting, the man he wanted to be, the man he was trying so hard to become. He walked to the window and looked out at the night sky. Stars covered the darkness like diamonds scattered on black cloth. Somewhere out there, Margaret was probably looking at these same stars, wondering what her new life would bring. Sam hoped she would find happiness here. He hoped she would help him become the man he was meant to be before violence and death had claimed so many years of his life. The coyotes howled again, closer this time. Sam automatically reached for his hip, where his gun belt used to hang. But there was nothing there now, just empty air and the memory of weight that was no longer needed. He had trained himself not to wear guns around the ranch. Part of becoming a new man meant leaving the old tools behind. But late at night, when the sounds of the wilderness reminded him how far he was from civilization, Sam sometimes wondered if he was being foolish. This was still dangerous country. Wild animals, harsh weather, and rough men all posed threats to anyone living alone. Maybe keeping his guns locked away was a mistake. Maybe a smart man would stay ready for trouble, even in paradise. Sam shook his head and turned away from the window. That kind of thinking belonged to his old life. Deadeye Sam would have slept with guns under his pillow and trusted no one. But Samuel Morrison, rancher and soon-to-be husband, had to learn to live without fear. He had to believe that his new life could be different. He blew out the oil lamp and climbed the ladder to his sleeping loft. Tomorrow he would ride to town to pick up supplies and check on the exact arrival time of next week's stagecoach. Everything had to be perfect for Margaret's arrival. The house needed to be cleaned thoroughly. The barn needed fresh hay. The corrals needed to be checked one more time. As Sam lay in his narrow bed, listening to the night sounds of his valley, he allowed himself to imagine what life might be like with a partner, someone to cook breakfast with in the mornings, someone to work alongside during the day, someone to sit with on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains. It would be good to hear a woman's laughter in his house. Good to have someone who cared whether he came home safe each night. Good to build something that would last beyond his own lifetime. Maybe they would have children someday. Boys who would learn to work the land honestly. Girls who would grow up never knowing the sound of gunfire or the smell of death. But first he had to make sure Margaret would want to stay. He had to prove that Samuel Morrison was worth loving. He had to show her that this valley could be a home, not just a hiding place. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows slightly. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked and fell. Sam's eyes opened in the darkness, his body automatically tense and alert. Old habits died hard. Even after 3 years of peace, his mind still catalogued every sound, still looked for threats in every shadow. But there was no danger here. Just the normal sounds of a wilderness night. Just the wind and the animals and the settling of his well-built house. Sam forced. The stagecoach rolled into Cedar Falls exactly on time, its wheels kicking up clouds of dust in the afternoon heat. Sam Morrison stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, his hat in his hands, watching as the driver climbed down and began untying baggage from the roof. His heart was beating faster than it had in years, faster than it used to beat even before a gunfight. 3 passengers stepped down from the coach, an old man with a white beard, a traveling salesman with a worn leather case, and then her. Margaret O'Sullivan was smaller than Sam had expected from her photograph, but her green eyes were exactly as bright and determined as they had looked in the picture. She wore a simple brown dress and carried a carpet bag that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and she looked around the dusty street with the careful gaze of someone who had learned to be cautious. When her eyes met Sam's, she smiled. Not a big smile, but a real one. The kind of smile that reached her eyes and made them sparkle like sunlight on water. "Mr. Morrison?" she asked, walking toward him with steady steps. "Yes, ma'am, Miss O'Sullivan, I presume." Sam felt awkward and nervous, like a schoolboy talking to his first girl. "Welcome to Cedar Falls. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "Please, call me Margaret. And the journey was long, but I've seen worse." Her voice carried just a hint of Irish accent, soft and musical. "I'm grateful to be here." Sam helped her retrieve her bags from the stagecoach. She didn't have much, just the carpet bag and a small wooden box that she handled very carefully. "My medical supplies," she explained when she noticed him looking at the box. "I learned some nursing back in Boston. Never know when such skills might come in handy." They climbed into Sam's wagon for the 2-hour ride to his ranch. At first, they were both quiet, stealing glances at each other when they thought the other wasn't looking. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was full of questions neither of them quite knew how to ask. "Tell me about the valley," Margaret finally said as they left the town behind. "Your letters made it sound like paradise." Sam felt his shoulders relax a little. Talking about his land was easy. "It's peaceful," he said. "Mountains all around. Good water. Plenty of grass for the cattle. Nearest neighbor is about 15 miles south. It can get lonely, but it's safe." Margaret nodded. "Safe sounds good to me." Something in her tone made Sam glance over at her. There was a shadow in her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that suggested she knew more about danger than a young lady from Boston should know. "What made you want to leave the city?" Sam asked gently. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, watching the landscape roll by. "Boston wasn't kind to people like me," she said finally. "Irish immigrants aren't welcome in many places. And when you're poor and have no family to protect you..." She shrugged. "Sometimes a person has to make her own way in the world." Sam understood. He had been making his own way for a long time too, running from his past just like she was running from hers. Maybe that was why he felt comfortable with her already. They were both starting over, both looking for something better than what they'd left behind. "Well, you're welcome in my valley," he said. "Our valley, if you decide to stay." Margaret smiled again, and this time it was warmer, more trusting. "I'd like that very much." As they got closer to the ranch, Sam found himself seeing his home through Margaret's eyes. Would she think the house was too small, too rough? Would she be disappointed by the isolation? Would she realize that marrying a man she'd never met was a terrible mistake? But when they topped the last hill and the valley spread out below them, Margaret gasped with genuine pleasure. "Oh, Sam, it's beautiful. Look at those mountains and the creek running right through your land." "Our land," Sam corrected softly, and Margaret blushed prettily. She was even more impressed when she saw the house and outbuildings. Sam had worked hard to make everything neat and sturdy, and it showed. "You built all this yourself?" Margaret asked as Sam helped her down from the wagon. "Every board and nail," Sam said with pride. "Took me nearly 3 years, working bit by bit." Margaret walked around the house slowly, running her hands along, the smooth wooden walls peering into the barn where Sam's horses nickered softly at her voice. "It's wonderful," she said. "You've made something really special here." That evening they shared their first meal together. Sam had spent days cleaning the house and preparing, but he was still nervous about everything. The stew was too salty. The bread was a little burned, the coffee was weak, but Margaret didn't seem to mind. She ate with good appetite and complimented everything, even offering to cook the next night. "I make a decent fish stew," she said. "If you can catch us some fish from that creek." "I can do that," Sam said, pleased that she was already making plans for tomorrow. They talked late into the evening, sitting on the porch and watching the stars come out. Margaret told him about her work in the charity hospital in Boston, how she had learned to set bones and stitch wounds and mix medicines. She talked about the long voyage from Ireland when she was just 16, how scared and hopeful she had been. Sam told her about building the ranch, about the satisfaction of working with his hands, about his dreams of raising the best cattle in Montana Territory. He was careful to keep his stories to the last 3 years, the safe years. Nothing about his life before coming to the valley. "What made you choose ranching?" Margaret asked. "You seem like a man who could have done anything." Sam was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. "I wanted to build something permanent," he said finally. "Something that would last. Something good." Margaret nodded as if she understood exactly what he meant. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Margaret took over most of the cooking and proved to be excellent at it. Her meals were better than anything Sam had eaten since leaving his mother's table 20 years ago. She also took care of the chickens Sam had bought for her arrival, coaxing them to lay more eggs than he had ever managed to get. But Margaret wasn't content to just work around the house. She wanted to learn about the ranch operations too. She followed Sam around as he checked on the cattle, asking questions about everything. How did he know when a cow was sick? How did he decide which pasture to use? How did he keep track of all the animals? "In Boston, the closest I got to livestock was buying meat from the butcher," she laughed. "But I want to understand your work, our work." Sam found himself enjoying her curiosity. It had been so long since he had anyone to talk to about the things he cared about. Margaret listened with genuine interest as he explained the challenges of ranching, the satisfaction of seeing healthy animals, the constant worry about weather and predators. When one of his best breeding cows developed an infection in her foot, Margaret proved her medical training wasn't limited to humans. She examined the cow carefully, then mixed a poultice from herbs she found growing wild around the ranch. "Infection is infection," she said matter-of-factly as she treated the animal. "The principles are the same whether you're treating a person or a cow." The cow recovered completely within a week. Sam began to realize that Margaret was exactly the kind of partner he had hoped for. She was practical, hard-working, and unafraid of challenges. She never complained about the isolation or the hard work. Instead, she threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. But there were moments when Sam caught her looking thoughtful, almost sad. Usually it happened in the evenings when the work was done, and they were sitting quietly together. Her eyes would get distant, and Sam wondered what memories she was wrestling with. One night he finally asked, "You never talk about your family back in Boston," he said gently. "Do you miss them?" Margaret was quiet for so long that Sam thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't have any family left," she said. "My parents died of fever 2 years after we came to America. I lived with my stepfather after that." She paused, and Sam saw her hands clench in her lap. "He wasn't a good man, Sam. He drank too much and had a terrible temper. When he got angry, he used his fists." Sam felt a cold rage building in his chest, the kind of rage that used to send him reaching for his guns. "He hit you?" "Among other things," Margaret said quietly. I stayed as long as I could because I had nowhere else to go. But when I turned 24, I decided I'd rather risk dying alone in the wilderness than spend another day in that house. Sam reached over and gently took her hand. Her fingers were shaking slightly. You're safe now, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. No one will ever hurt you again, I promise you that. Margaret looked up at him with tears in her eyes. That's why I answered your advertisement, she said. Your letter sounded like it came from a good man. A gentle man. Someone who understood about wanting to build a better life. Sam squeezed her hand gently. He understood perfectly. They were both refugees from their past lives, both looking for peace and safety in this remote valley. The difference was that his past might catch up with him someday, might bring danger right to their door, but he pushed that thought away. Those days were over. Deadeye Sam Morrison was buried and gone. Only Samuel Morrison remained, and Samuel Morrison was going to protect this woman and this life no matter what it cost him. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late September, though Sam and Margaret didn't know it at the time. Jake Brennan and his younger brother Colt had been riding hard for 3 days, staying ahead of a posse from Colorado who wanted them for robbing a bank in Denver. The brothers had made off with nearly $2,000, but the chase had been fierce and relentless. They needed somewhere to lay low for a while, somewhere they could rest their horses and plan their next move. From a ridge overlooking the Imayar Valley, Jake studied Sam's ranch through an old pair of field glasses he had stolen from a cavalry officer the year before. Look at that, little brother, Jake said, pointing down at the neat buildings and well-maintained corrals. Nice little setup. Probably got money hidden away somewhere. Colt Brennan was only 22, 6 years younger than Jake, but he had already followed his brother into a life of violence and crime. Where Jake was calculating and cold, Colt was hot-headed and mean. He enjoyed the fear in people's eyes when they realized they were being robbed. Looks like easy pickings, Colt agreed, studying the ranch. Just one man and wait a minute. He focused the glasses on Margaret, who was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. Well, look what we got here. Jake took the glasses back and watched Margaret for a long moment. Even from a distance, he could see that she was young and pretty. A slow, ugly smile spread across his scarred face. This just got a lot more interesting, he said. We can take whatever money they got, and then... He didn't finish the sentence, but Colt understood. They had done this before, in other isolated places with other victims who were too far from help to matter. When do we go down there? Colt asked, already fingering the grip of his pistol. Not yet, Jake said, settling back against a tree. We watch first. Learn their routines. See when they're most vulnerable. The smart hunter studies his prey before he strikes. For 3 days, the Brennan brothers watched the ranch from various hiding spots around the valley. They learned that Sam and Margaret rose early and worked hard all day. They saw Sam ride out each morning to check on his cattle, usually taking the same route. They noticed that Margaret often worked alone around the house while Sam was away. Most importantly, they saw that Sam appeared to be unarmed. He wore no gun belt, carried no rifle, and moved like a man who had never had to fight for his life. To the Brennan brothers, he looked like a soft farmer who would probably hand over his money and beg for mercy, rather than resist. They were very wrong about that, but they had no way of knowing it. On Friday morning, Jake decided they had waited long enough. Today's the day, he told Colt as they checked their weapons and prepared to ride down into the valley. We'll hit them just after the rancher comes back from checking his cattle, catch them both together. But Sam's instincts, dulled by 3 years of peace, weren't completely dead. That morning, as he saddled his horse for his usual ride around the property, something felt wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the feeling was strong enough to make him pause and look around carefully. The cattle were grazing peacefully. The horses in the corral seemed calm. Margaret was singing softly as she worked in her vegetable garden. Everything looked normal. But Sam had learned long ago to trust his instincts, even when he couldn't explain them. During his gunfighting, years that sixth sense had saved his life more than once. Men who made their living with weapons developed a feel for danger, the way animals could sense a coming storm. Margaret, he called from the barn doorway. I'm going to check the north pasture today instead of the usual route. Margaret looked up from her tomatoes and waved. All right, I'll have lunch ready when you get back. Sam rode out, but instead of heading straight to the north pasture, he took a long loop around the eastern edge of his property. From a high point near the creek, he used his own field glasses to scan the surrounding hills. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then a flash of sunlight reflected off something metallic on the ridge overlooking his house. Sam focused his glasses on the spot and felt his blood run cold. 2 men were watching his ranch. Even at this distance, Sam could see they were armed and looked like trouble. The way they were positioned, the way they moved, told him these weren't just travelers passing through. These men were studying his home with the patience of predators planning an attack. Sam's hands tightened on the field glasses as all his old instincts came flooding back. The peaceful rancher vanished, replaced by the alert, calculating mind of a man who had survived by reading danger in every shadow. He watched the 2 strangers for another 10 minutes, noting their positions, their weapons, their horses. Both men carried pistols and rifles. Their clothes were dusty and travel-worn. Most telling of all, they had the patient stillness of men who were comfortable with violence. Sam recognized the type immediately. He had been that type once. Outlaws. Men who lived by taking what they wanted from those weaker than themselves. Men who would kill without hesitation if it served their purposes. And they were watching his home, watching Margaret. Sam felt a cold rage building inside him, different from any anger he had known during his gunfighting days. Back then, violence had been business, professional, nothing personal about it. But this was personal. These men were threatening the life he had built, the woman he had come to love, the peace he had fought so hard to find. He rode back toward the ranch, but not directly. Sam used every bit of cover the landscape offered, moving like the skilled hunter he had once been. If the watchers on the ridge were paying attention, they would assume he was still out checking cattle. When he reached the house, Sam tied his horse behind the barn where it couldn't be seen from the hills. He found Margaret in the kitchen preparing vegetables for their lunch. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. The knife she was using to slice potatoes stopped moving. "What's wrong?" she asked. "There are 2 men watching our ranch from the hills," Sam said. "Armed men. They've been there for a while, studying our routines." Margaret's face went pale, but she didn't panic. Sam was grateful for that. A woman who had survived what she had survived would know how to handle danger. "What do we do?" she asked. Sam was quiet for a moment, thinking. In the old days, he would have ridden up into those hills and settled the matter quickly and permanently. But that was Deadeye Sam's solution. Samuel Morrison, peaceful rancher and husband, needed to find another way. "Maybe they're just passing through," he said, not really believing it. "Maybe if we stay alert and wait, they'll move on." But even as he said it, Sam was calculating distances and angles, planning fields of fire, thinking about weapons and cover. Old habits died hard. Margaret studied his face carefully. "You don't really believe that, do you?" Sam met her eyes and saw that she deserved honesty. "No," he said. "I don't think they're passing through. Men like that. They don't spend 3 days watching a place unless they're planning something." 3 days? Margaret's voice was sharp. "You've known about them for 3 days?" "No," Sam said quickly. "I just spotted them this morning. But from their positions, their patience, they've been watching us for a while." Margaret sat down, her knife, and moved to the window, staying to one side so she couldn't be seen from outside. "What kind of men are they?" she asked. "The worst kind," Sam said quietly. "The kind who take whatever they want and don't care who gets hurt in the process." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the peaceful valley that suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. "We could leave," she said finally. "Pack up and ride to town. Stay there until they move on." Sam considered it. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do, but something in him rebelled at the idea of running from his own home. "This is our place," he said. "We built this life together. I'm not going to let some outlaws drive us away from it." Margaret turned from the window to look at him. "Then what do you suggest?" Before Sam could answer, they heard the sound of horses approaching the house, not fast, but steady and deliberate. Sam moved to the front window and looked out. 2 riders were coming down the hill toward their house. Both men were armed, just as Sam had expected. The older one, riding slightly ahead, had a jagged scar running down the left side of his face. The younger one kept looking around nervously, his hand resting on his gun. "Stay behind me," Sam told Margaret. "Let me handle this." But as he said it, Sam realized he had no idea how to handle it. For 3 years, he had lived as a peaceful man. He had no weapons within easy reach. He had trained himself not to think like a gunfighter. Now that training might get them both killed. The riders stopped in front of the house and sat their horses, studying the building with the careful attention of men who expected trouble. "Hello, the house," the scarred man called out. "We're looking for water for our horses. Wondered if you might help us out." Sam stepped onto his porch, Margaret close behind him. Up close, the 2 strangers looked even more dangerous. Both were unshaven and dusty from hard travel. Both wore their guns like men who knew how to use them. But what worried Sam most was the look in their eyes, especially the younger one. There was a hunger there, a cruel anticipation that made Sam's skin crawl. What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but to Margaret, watching from the porch, it seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jake Brennan's hand was moving toward his gun when Sam suddenly wasn't standing beside her anymore. He had moved faster than she thought humanly possible, diving sideways off the porch while yelling a single word that made her blood freeze. "Run!" Margaret's nursing training kicked in automatically. When someone yelled "run" in that tone of voice, you ran first and asked questions later. She spun toward the house, but before she could take a step, a rough hand grabbed her arm and yanked her backward. Colt Brennan had jumped down from his horse the moment he saw Sam move. Now he had one arm around Margaret's waist and his gun pressed against her temple. "Hold it right there, farmer," Colt yelled. "I got your woman." Sam rolled behind the water, rough, and came up in a crouch, his hands empty but his eyes deadly calm. The transformation was so complete that Margaret barely recognized him. This wasn't her gentle husband who fixed fences and worried about sick cattle. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. "Let her go," Sam said, his voice carrying across the yard with quiet authority. Jake had his gun clear of its holster now, but he wasn't pointing it at Sam. He was looking around frantically, trying to figure out where his easy target had gone. "Show yourself, Morrison," Jake shouted. "My brother's got your wife," and his fingers getting real itchy on this trigger. "I can see that," Sam replied calmly. He was still crouched behind the water trough, but his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Question is, what do you boys want to walk away from this?" Margaret felt Colt's arm tighten around her waist. His gun hand was shaking slightly, and she could smell the fear sweat on him despite his threatening words. "We want your money," Jake called out. "All of it. And then we want some time alone with your missus." "Can't help you with that second part," Sam said, and there was something in his voice that made both brothers shiver. "But I might be willing to discuss the money." Margaret tried to understand what was happening. Where had Sam learned to move like that? Why wasn't he panicking like a normal person would? And why did he sound so calm, so in control, when there was a gun pointed at her head? "You discuss—" "Nothing," Colt snarled, pressing his gun harder against Margaret's skull. "You come out with your hands up or I blow her brains out." "No, you won't," Sam said quietly. The certainty in his voice made Colt blink in confusion. "What did you say?" "I said you won't shoot her," Sam repeated. "See, boys, I've been watching you for the last few minutes, and I can tell you're not professional killers. You're just thieves who got in over your heads." Jake's face flushed red with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about, farmer." "Oh, but I do," Sam said. "I know exactly what kind of men you are. Small-time robbers who pick on easy targets. You probably never killed anyone in your lives. Oh, you might have wounded a few people, scared a few more, but actual killing, that's different. That's crossing a line most men can't uncross." Margaret felt some of the tension leave Colt's arm. Sam's words were having an effect. "But here's the thing," Sam continued, his voice growing even quieter, even more dangerous. I crossed that line a long time ago, 23 times to be exact. The numbers hit both brothers like physical blows, 23 men dead. That wasn't the record of a farmer or a rancher. That was the record of a professional killer. You're lying, Jake said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Am I? Sam asked. Tell me, Jake, how many men have you actually killed? Not wounded, not scared away, but put in the ground permanently? Jake's gun hand was shaking now. We've killed plenty of men. No, you haven't, Sam said with absolute certainty. If you had, you'd know that a real killer doesn't waste time with threats and speeches. A real killer just kills. In the silence that followed, Margaret heard something that made her heart stop. The unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. But it wasn't coming from either of the Brennan brothers. It was coming from Sam's direction. How was that possible? He had been unarmed when he dove off the porch. She was sure of it. Here's what's going to happen, Sam said, and his voice now carried the absolute authority of a man who had dealt death and survived to tell about it. Colt, you're going to take that gun away from my wife's head very slowly. Then both of you are going to mount up and ride out of my valley, and you're going to do it right now. Go to hell, Colt screamed, his nerve finally breaking. I'll kill her. I swear I'll... The shot came from somewhere behind and to the left of the water trough. Margaret saw the muzzle flash out of the corner of her eye and heard the sharp crack of a rifle. Colt's gun went spinning out of his hand, leaving his fingers bloody and useless. Colt screamed and staggered backward, clutching his ruined hand to his chest. Margaret found herself free and ran toward the house without looking back. Jake spun toward where the shot had come from, bringing his pistol around. But Sam's voice stopped him cold. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Jake froze. Standing 20 feet away, having moved from behind the water trough to behind the corner of the barn without making a sound, was Sam Morrison. But this wasn't the Sam Morrison that Jake had been expecting to rob. This Sam Morrison held a rifle with the easy familiarity of a man born to weapons. His stance was perfect, balanced and ready. His eyes were cold and steady, without a trace of fear or hesitation. This was a man who had killed before and would kill again without losing a moment's sleep. Drop the gun, Jake, Sam said quietly. Jake's hand was shaking so badly now that he could barely hold his pistol. You can't be. You're just a farmer. I used to be other things, Sam said. Things you really don't want to know about. Now drop the gun before I lose what little patience I have left. Jake's gun clattered to the ground. Smart choice, Sam said. Now help your brother get back on his horse. You've got exactly 1 minute. To get off my property before I decide you're still a threat to my wife. Colt was whimpering and trying to wrap his bleeding hand with his bandana. Jake helped him stumble toward their horses, both brothers casting fearful glances back at Sam. This ain't over, Jake called out as they mounted up. Nobody treats the Brennan brothers like this. Sam's rifle never wavered from its target. Yes, it is over, he said calmly. Because if I ever see either of you again, anywhere at any time, I'll kill you both before you can say a word. That's not a threat, Jake. That's a promise from a man who's kept 23 similar promises. The brothers rode away as fast as Colt's wounded hand would allow, not looking back. Sam watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then slowly lowered his rifle. The deadly calm began to fade from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like sickness. Margaret approached him carefully. She had seen what he was capable of now, and she wasn't sure what to expect. Sam, she said softly. He turned to look at her, and she saw that his hands were shaking almost as badly as Jake's had been. The rifle slipped from his fingers and fell to the ground. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice hoarse. Did they hurt you? No, Margaret said. I'm fine. But Sam, how did you? Where did that rifle come from? You were unarmed when you jumped off the porch. Sam closed his eyes and seemed to age 10 years in 10 seconds. I keep weapons hidden around the property, he said quietly. Old habits. There's a rifle behind the rain barrel, another one in the barn, pistols in the house. Margaret stared at him. You've been armed this whole time? Even when you were working around the ranch? Not carrying weapons, Sam said. Sam, but always within reach of them, always ready. He opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression of infinite sadness. "I'm sorry, Margaret. You married a rancher, but that's not all I am. That's not all I've ever been." Margaret thought about everything she had just witnessed. The way Sam had moved faster than seemed possible. The way he had controlled the entire situation with just his voice. The way he had made that impossible shot to disarm Colt without injuring her. Most of all, she thought about the 23 men he had mentioned. 23 men he had killed. "Who are you?" she whispered. Sam's shoulders sagged. "My name really is Samuel Morrison," he said. "That part was true. But before I came to this valley, before I built this ranch, I was someone else. Someone you wouldn't want to know." Margaret waited, sensing there was more. "They used to call me Deadeye Sam," he said finally. "I was a gunfighter, Margaret. The best in the territory, maybe the best anywhere. Men would come from hundreds of miles away just to try their luck against me. And I killed them all?" Margaret felt dizzy. Her gentle husband, the man who worried about injured cattle and brought her wildflowers, had once been a professional killer. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you live that way?" Sam picked up his rifle and walked toward the house, his movements heavy with exhaustion. "Started when I was 15, he said. "My family was killed by raiders. I learned to use a gun to survive, and I was good at it. Too good. Word spread, and men started coming after me, either to make a name for themselves by killing Deadeye Sam, or to hire me to kill someone else." He stopped at the porch steps and looked back at her. "For 15 years that was my life. Violence and death, and always looking over my shoulder. Until one day I realized I couldn't remember what I was fighting for." That evening, after the danger had passed and the Brennan brothers were miles away, Sam and Margaret sat together in their kitchen as the sun painted the western mountains gold and crimson. But the comfortable silence they usually shared was filled with unspoken questions and half-finished thoughts. Margaret had prepared their dinner as always, but neither of them had much appetite. The events of the afternoon hung between them like a wall that needed to be torn down before they could move forward. Finally, Margaret set down her fork and looked across the table at her husband. "I need to know everything," she said quietly. "If we're going to make this marriage work, I need to understand who you really are." Sam had been dreading this moment since the shooting stopped. He had hoped somehow that they could just go back to the way things were before. But looking into Margaret's eyes, he realized that was impossible. Too much had changed. Too much truth had been revealed. "Where do you want me to start?" he asked. "At the beginning," Margaret said. "Tell me about the boy who became Deadeye Sam." Sam stared into his coffee cup for a long moment, gathering memories he had tried to bury for 3 years. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant and sad. "I grew up on a small farm in Kansas," he said. "Had a ma, a pa, and a little sister, named Beth. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Pa taught me to shoot when I was 12 just for hunting and protecting the farm. Turned out I had a natural talent for it." Margaret waited patiently as Sam struggled with the painful memories. "When I was 15, a gang of raiders hit our farm. They were looking for horses and supplies, but when Pa tried to stop them..." Sam's voice trailed off. "They killed my whole family, Margaret. Ma, Pa, little Beth. All of them, just for a few horses and some grain." Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm so sorry, Sam." "I wasn't at the house when it happened," Sam continued. "I was out hunting, heard the gunshots, and came running back. But I was too late. By the time I got there, they were riding away and my family was already gone." Sam's hand tightened around Margaret's. "I spent 2 years tracking down every member of that gang. 7 men in total. I killed them all one by one. And word got out about the 15-year-old boy who had hunted down 7 grown men and beaten them all in fair fights." Margaret felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way Sam said it, but she didn't let go of his hand. "After that, it seemed like every young gun in the territory wanted to try me," Sam said. "They'd ride into whatever town I was in, call me out, and I'd have to face them or be branded a coward. And I was never going to be helpless again. Never going to let someone hurt people I cared about while I stood by, unable to stop it. So you kept fighting, Margaret said. For 15 years, Sam nodded. Sometimes it was young fools looking to make a reputation. Sometimes it was hired work, men who needed a problem solved and were willing to pay for the best gun they could find. I told myself I was only taking jobs against bad men, outlaws, and murderers, but the truth is, after a while, it didn't matter who they were. I was just empty inside, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Margaret studied his face in the lamplight. What changed? Sam was quiet for a moment, then looked up at her with eyes full of pain and regret. There was a kid in New Mexico. Couldn't have been more than 16. He called me out in the main street of Socorro in front of half the town. I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. Said killing Deadeye Sam would make him the most famous gunfighter in the West. Sam's voice became barely a whisper. He was so young, Margaret. Reminded me of myself when I started down this path. But he wasn't fast enough, wasn't smart enough, and Sam stopped, unable to continue. You killed him, Margaret said gently. I had to, Sam said, tears forming in his eyes. He drew first. It was a fair fight by every rule of the code. But as I stood over his body, looking at his face, I realized he looked just like my little sister Beth would have looked if she'd lived to 16. Sam wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. That night I took my guns and rode out of Socorro. I rode for 3 days straight, not eating, not sleeping, just trying to outrun what I'd become. And when I finally stopped, I was in this valley. It was like God had led me to the one place on earth where I might find peace. Margaret squeezed his hand. And you did find peace. For 3 years you were just Samuel Morrison the rancher. I tried to be, Sam said. I really tried. But today proved that Deadeye Sam was never really gone. The moment you were threatened, all of it came back like it had never left. The speed, the accuracy, the willingness to kill. It's still part of me, Margaret. It always will be. Margaret was quiet for several minutes, processing everything Sam had told her. Finally, she stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful valley where so much violence had occurred just hours earlier. Sam, she said without turning around, do you remember what I told you about my stepfather? Of course, Sam replied. He hurt you. He used his fists on you. Margaret nodded. What I didn't tell you was how it ended, why I finally decided to leave Boston. She turned away from the window to face him. There was a girl who lived next door to us, Annie Murphy. She was only 14, but she was starting to develop into a young woman. And my stepfather, he started looking at her the way men look at women they want. Sam felt a cold knot form in his stomach. One night, Annie's parents were both working late at the factory. My stepfather had been drinking and he saw his chance. He broke into their house and Margaret's voice broke. I heard Annie screaming from next door. I knew exactly what was happening, and I knew no one was coming to help her. Margaret moved back to the table and sat down across from Sam, so I did something about it. Sam stared at her, beginning to understand. I had learned about medicines at the hospital where I worked, Margaret continued, including poisons. That night, after my stepfather came home, I put something in his whiskey that made sure he would never hurt another girl again. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun barrel. You killed him, Sam said quietly. I did, Margaret admitted, and I've never regretted it for 1 second. Because men like that don't stop, Sam, they don't change. They just find new victims unless someone stops them permanently. She reached across the table and took both of his hands in hers. That's why I understand what you did today. That's why I'm not afraid of you, even knowing what you're capable of. Because you used your skills to protect innocent people, just like I used mine. Sam stared at his wife in amazement. You never told anyone? Who would I tell? Margaret asked. The police who never listened when women complained about men who hurt them? The neighbors who thought my stepfather was just a hard-working man who deserved respect? The truth is, Sam, there are some problems that can only be solved with violence. And sometimes good people have to do terrible things to protect the innocent. Sam felt something shift inside him, like a weight he had been carrying for years suddenly becoming lighter. You really understand. I understand completely, Margaret said. You're not a killer, Sam. You're a protector. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both lost in thought. Then Margaret spoke again. Those men today, the Brennan brothers, are they gone for good? Sam considered the question. Probably not, he said honestly. Men like that don't forget humiliation easily. And now they know who I really am. That might make them more dangerous, or it might make them smart enough to stay away. Margaret nodded. Then we need to be ready. We? Margaret smiled. You don't think I'm going to let you face whatever comes next alone, do you? I told you, Sam. I'm not afraid of violence when it's necessary, and I'm not afraid of you. Over the following days, Sam began to understand what Margaret meant. Instead of treating him differently after learning about his past, she seemed more committed to their partnership than ever. When he offered to teach her to shoot properly, she accepted eagerly. I learned the basics back in Boston, she said, as Sam showed her how to hold his spare rifle. But I want to be really good at it, good enough to help you if trouble comes. Margaret proved to be a natural marksman just as Sam had been at her age. Within a week, she could hit a target at 50 yards with deadly accuracy. More importantly, she showed the same calm focus under pressure that had made Sam legendary. You're sure about this? Sam asked one evening as they practiced together behind the barn. Once you cross this line, there's no going back. Margaret lowered the rifle and looked at him seriously. Sam, I crossed that line years ago when I decided my stepfather had to die. The only difference now is that I have someone to stand beside me instead of facing the darkness alone. As autumn turned to winter, they settled into a new routine. They still worked the ranch together, still shared quiet evenings on the porch, still laughed and talked and planned for the future. But now there was an added element to their partnership. They were ready for trouble. Sam no longer kept his guns, locked away. He wore a pistol while working around the ranch, and rifles were placed strategically throughout the property. Margaret carried a small pistol in her apron and knew exactly where every weapon was hidden.